We'll see it more as we go along through this podcast and notice some lenses that are very interesting as far as focal length is concerned, which is great. We like choices. A lot of brands are going this route with their lens offerings.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. My name is Alan Weitz.
And I'm Jill Waterman.
When we recorded our annual Cameras of the Year episode back in December, somebody said something about maybe doing a follow-up show about all of the new lenses that came out in 2022 and maybe include whatever new glass is announced during the opening month or two of 2023. Well, here we are, with the latest lens announcements coming out of the winter 2023 trade shows under our belts. We have what to talk about with a slew of new optics. We're not going to get into all of the lenses that have been announced because that would make everybody's head spin. So we've narrowed things down to a select group of prime and zoom lenses spanning medium format, full frame, crop sensor, and micro four thirds camera formats. For informed insights about all of the above and to get a sense of how consumers are reacting to these lenses in real life, we're delighted to welcome Kevin Rickert back to the show as our house expert. Kevin Rickert, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm looking forward to going over the new lenses that have been announced in recent days and months.
Sounds like what we're going to be doing here today. We're going to be talking alphabetically. So let's start with Canon, which has 9 lenses between 22 and 2023. And where do you want to start on this one? They're all good.
Probably the RF-135 f1.8 L IS USM, which probably was announced back in November. It's a great addition to their lineup. Canon's been fleshing out their lineup recently as far as lenses. This is a great lens for portraiture. Typically, it's the choice between an 85 millimeter or a 135. It's a very enjoyable focal length, in my opinion. This lens, in just playing around with it, it's a very fast autofocus. It has image stabilization, hence the IS. And when you pair it with one of the newer Canon cameras, you get 8 stops of stabilization. And it is weather sealed, so people could do their portraits outside, or if it's a rainy wedding, maybe. But there's many different uses for this lens. That focal length is very versatile. And as all the RF lenses that exist that have been announced, they have a control ring, so you could actually program that to control your aperture, your ISO, exposure compensation, and so on and so forth. Early reviews on this lens have been good for the people who have gotten it. It's one of those lenses that, we can't keep on the shelves because it's so popular. It's in limited quantities, but it's out there and people do have it.
There wasn't an EF version of this, was there? This is a new lens, a 135 1.8. It's a new focal length and aperture combination. Am I right about that?
I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong here, someone will. That's how it works. I think there was an F2. I think it was an F2 on there, but I know there's a 200 F2, I believe.
That's what I believe also. Yeah, that's why I'm saying I think 1.8, they tweaked it a little bit more in the speed department.
Yeah. I mean, it's they're keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak, because, they had such a late start to the mirrorless game, but for the most part, 135 is an important lens to have in your lens lineup, and I'm glad Canon went with it because I feel like the RF system is a very well-balanced lens-body combination. Lenses seem to disappear into your hand, and it doesn't feel as heavy, and that's by design. They're very back-heavy instead of being front-heavy.
One thing that's notable about this new lens, according to David, one of our reviewers, the bokeh is very unique because of that 1.8 depth of field. He said might not be to everyone's liking, but it makes chaotic backgrounds disappear and it warps the bokeh a little bit in the corners, but he doesn't mind it at all.
It's like almost called cat-eye bokeh. So it's more of an oval shape instead of being circular balls. And it's just on how the light enters the lens, but it gives a unique look. Some people like it. Some people are just like, it's too much for me, but different strokes for different folks.
Exactly.
And that also changes a lot depending on how close you are to your subject and what's going on in the background as well, as far as what's going on with specular highlights and things of that sort. But it's really funny. Nobody used to talk about bokeh. It was a topic that nobody knew from. And all of a sudden, it's like the number one thing. And everyone's talking about their curved aperture blades. It's really become a big thing. And the truth of the matter is, everyone's got their own idea of what it's supposed to look like. But there's really, and that's really a personal thing. There's nothing definitive of what it is, except that, if you have like 5 aperture blades and they're straight, everything looks kind of, chunky and stuff like that.
Let's get the definitive answer to this question. How is that word pronounced?
It's a Japanese word, so I think it would be like bokeh.
It is Japanese.
Yeah.
It is. It's derived from Japanese, and it's and bokeh.
Bokeh.
Everyone says bokeh. It's bokeh, and it is a Japanese phrase. Bokeh is a term that describes the image quality of what is not in focus in a photograph. It's the characteristics of the specular highlights in the background and foreground. And if you want to know what good bokeh would be, what you have to do is you have to walk under a tree in the summertime with sunlight coming through it and look at the shadows of the leaves on the ground. There's no sharp lines. Everything is soft and rounded.
Professor Weitz, thank you for that answer.
Anyway, now we got that out of the way.
So besides RF-135, which is probably the headliner for what came out from Canon this year, they also are building out their RF-S lenses, which are for the APS-C cameras that were recently announced. So you have now the typical usual suspects. You have a 18-150, you have an 18-45, you have a 24-50, small one right there. You have a 55-210, which has been a standard. And then for people who want glass for shooting wildlife or sports, you have an 800 RF that was announced, as well as a 1200 millimeter lens that was announced as well. So that just basically, Canon right now was just rounding out their lineup, making it a destination for people who are on the sidelines, wondering if they should go to mirrorless, because now Canon is firmly entrenched on the mirrorless battlefield, so to speak.
Yeah, EF lenses, their history in DSLRs with Canon. Is that correct? I mean, it's not going to be happening anymore. What they made, and they're moving on.
They are pretty much going straight forward into the mirrorless lineup, hence the newer releases like the R8 and the R50, which is a full frame and a APS-C. So it looks like the Rebel line is getting sunset, and we'll see what that leads into the future. And also, don't forget about the EFM lenses that are big overseas, but over here it's kind of just second fiddle.
Are people upset that DSLRs are kind of going away? Are there people still hanging on to that technology and not feeling comfortable with mirrorless for whatever reason? Or are people kind of like just going with the flow? What's your feedback on that?
I think these days a lot of people are leaning towards mirrorless because they have to, because manufacturers aren't producing new DSLR bodies. But I feel that when Canon released the R5 and R6, when Nikon released the Z9, it kind of woke people up to be like, let's finally do this. Let's switch. The adapters are very good. So if anybody has older glass, their F lenses, their EF lenses, they could transition at their leisure. So,
gotcha.
But there's still some people who have that mindset, and it's one of those things that annoys me a bit, but people are who they are, who are like, oh, mirrorless cameras feel like toys. They don't feel big in the hand. And for that, I'm like, look at any film camera from the 80s. They were made of plastic sometimes. And it's just like,
oh, yeah,
weren't those toys? But you loved them. So what's the difference now? Because you had big, bulky bodies from throughout the early 2000s up until recently, they went smaller again. And if you wanted to feel it in your hands, you could put a battery grip on there.
So let's move on to Fujifilm. They came out with 5 lenses in the past year, since early 2022, including a couple that were released in September. The Fujifilm XF 56mm f1.2. Kevin, what's your thoughts about that?
I loved the original 56 1.2. It was their portrait equivalent because it comes out to be like 84 millimeters in a full frame terms because of the APS-C. Fuji colors just pop. They know how to make lenses. And I think now a lot of people are realizing the Fujifilm system. So it's a new version of a classic lens. It's weather sealed now, hence the WR designation on there. It's very similar to the original, which had lots of character. So this one is just a more robust body. So if someone wants to go outdoors, some light rain, it is weather sealed now. And it's just something that Fujifilm has been doing. They've done great work on expanding their lineup, re-releasing like lenses that they may have like forgot about or needed to be updated, like the 56. There was the 150 to 600, which was released earlier last year. This is for the people, who just want a zoom lens for photographing wildlife and sports. You get a lot of reach with that lens. They did have a basic 18-120, called basic, but it's like your everyday zoom lens on there, which is weather sealed as well. And they also did a 30 millimeter 2.8. One of the things to note is that they have the medium formats, the GF line, like the GFX 100, 50, and they came out with a 20 to 35, which in full frame terms is like a 16 to 28. So that's good for people who just wanted a wide angle. They have two systems to take care of, and they're doing a great job of taking care of both right now, getting good bodies out there. They released a lot of bodies at the end of the year that we discussed last year. So, yeah, it's about the lenses now.
Fujifilm has always been really in the forefront in so many ways. But just fast on that 56 1.2, is it the same optical formula as the original version? They just waterproofed it, or did they tweak the optical formula too? Do you know?
From what I've read, the optical formula is the same. They just wanted to make it more robust. So that weather sealing was a big thing for them, especially since that they're one of their headlining lenses. So they wanted to make sure that was up to snuff with the newer bodies that they put out.
Gotcha. Okay. I think a lot of people don't know that Fujifilm's been around for a lot longer than the past 10, 20 years. You have to remember that when Contax came out with their 645, that was using Zeiss glass. And Hasselblad lost their ability to use Zeiss glass, which, and again, Zeiss was the number one glass that Hasselblad was using. Hasselblad went to Fuji glass, and Fuji is amazing. The lenses that they've been making for all of the current Hasselblad cameras, that's all Fuji. And they had a lot to do with a lot of other camera formats back in the day. So this is nothing new for them. They're very good at what they've been doing, and they've been doing a really good job for a very long time.
Well, speaking of Hasselblad.
Yeah, so Hasselblad has 3 new lenses. They are all released back in September. And they are for the medium format cameras, obviously. And they have a 38 millimeter 2.5, a 55 millimeter 2.5, and a 90 millimeter 2.5. And these are all wider angle and normal lenses. Is that correct, Kev?
It's one's 30 millimeter, the other one's 43 millimeters, and the other one equates to like a 71 millimeter lens.
For 35 millimeter equivalents, yes. What I kind of find it interesting is that the 55 millimeter 2.5, that comes out to being the equivalent of a 43 millimeter, which is really a true normal lens as far as perspective, the way our eyes render spatial relationships. So that lens is kind of neat. I like that focal length very, very much. I'm curious to see how popular it'll prove to be with Hasselblad users.
Yeah, there's a few people out there who dove into the Hasselblad system. The lenses are gorgeous as far as visually, as far as like how they're built. They have the same uniform industrial design, I guess you could call it that. It's fun to pair with the X2D system. It's a very fun system, and this just equates to put the design language into something that is recognizable as a Hasselblad. And it's once again, it's rounding that out, having people migrate who may have a 502 or something like that. They want to just go into mirrorless. And it's a very well thought out system. The menu is great too. Unfortunately, no other camera brand thinks about their menu system like they do. So hopefully they get the message.
And one thing to consider in terms of a limitation is that these lenses aren't weather sealed. So the usage for them would be more of a studio or maybe an art use rather than somebody who's going out taking landscapes.
I don't know. When I was out shooting offshore powerboat racing and yachting and all that stuff, none of my gear was weatherproof. And the whole trick of that was just to trade it in more frequently before the salt did any kind of damage internally. You just rinse everything down real good, clean it all off, and go back and buy something new. No, honestly, I really appreciate the weather sealing because I used to have to do some serious cleaning of my gear that used to get seriously wet and questionable at times. One thing I'm a little bit curious about, though, is that how many people are coming in right now to the store looking at medium format and seriously weighing it against their 35 millimeter full frame equivalence, for lack of a better word, because there's a good argument to be made for medium format that you could also throw an equally good argument for not going into medium format. How are people going with that? Is it still strong between the Fuji and the Hasselblad as far as people buying into medium format and using them professionally?
People are buying into it. It's still one of those things in which there is a price of entry that scares a lot of people. But I think Fujifilm, to be specific, has done a great job of making it accessible to a lot of people. And people are having fun with it in a way that they may not have been if it was just like a Hasselblad system or a Mamiya or a Pentax 645. So I think what's going to happen is, and it's also with how medium format, a lot of people have been shooting film medium format recently because that film is popular. But the idea is that there's a lot of people who are buying these cameras off of eBay, the older ones, and like, wow, this is great. I love the medium format look. Granted, it's like 6x6 or 6x7. And there's some 645s, especially like a Fujifilm camera that exists, 645Z, I think. But now film is kind of hard to come by. So like, I want to keep this look. What do I do? And I think people are looking at the Fujifilm system and being like, oh, this is not that bad price-wise. I could get a 50 megapixel or 100 if you please. And, you know, your computer may melt, but that's up to you. I think it's becoming more equitable going into like medium format now, for the most part. Like the Hasselblad system is still pricey, and that's one of the things. But people who shoot Hasselblad know that. But it's still one of those things people still come in and just look at the full frames just because people are doing more photo and video. Even though they're trying to put more video into these cameras, it's still not there. And people know that medium format cameras are a bit slower, more deliberate. Hence why people use them in studios and, you know, fashion. You're not going to shoot Super Bowl with this or something like that.
Well, yes and no. I mean, you know, there are people taking old speed graphics out now and doing press events, so you never know. But, you know, I just as a little aside, this is obviously going to be this is a show on lenses, but to our listeners, if you've never tried to shoot with a medium format camera, you might want to just rent one sometime or borrow one if you can and give it a try and take a look at it, because it's not just the size of the negative or the image sensor. And has nothing to do with the amount of resolution that you get from it. It has to do with the look, because these lenses, the larger the format, the photograph has a different appearance to it. And for that reason alone, it's worth investigating, because you might actually like the look of a larger format, not because there's more resolution in there, but because it has a different look. And that's something that, again, if you're serious about photography, you should investigate at some point in time. There might be a whole new world for you.
Let's move on to Nikon. Nikon came out with 9 lenses throughout 2022 and 2023.
They have. Nikon released 2. I think they announced it, then they released it during what depth of field it was out there. But they have the 26 millimeter 2.8, a very nice pancake lens. And then my favorite release that they did was the 85 1.2 S lens, which is their true portrait showcase piece as of right now. This is a very nice portrait lens for those looking to do so. And I mentioned it earlier in this podcast about 85 and 135. Both are very good for this, but Nikon 85 is extremely nice. During the depth of field floor, I picked it up and just held it in my hand. Very well balanced. Colors render amazingly. It's just that it's not in stock. It's Nikon. Nikon's famous for doing this, but hopefully it'll be shipping.
It's one of the things I liked about the 26-2.8, the first lens we mentioned. The size is wonderful. I think that is a terrific walk-around lens, a terrific travel lens. I mean, I'm very sensitive to weight on everything right now because I like to have a couple of lenses with me when I travel. And size and weight is becoming increasingly important to me for all kinds of reasons. And I looked at this lens and I go, this is the kind of lens I'd really like to have with me. I would have a great time with this lens.
What's interesting about the 26 is just the focal length. It's like, typically it's like 24, then 28, then 35. So it's not a 24, it's not a 28, it's a 26. So this is, and we'll see it more as we go along through this podcast and notice some lenses that are very interesting as far as focal length is concerned, which is great. We like choices, and a lot of brands are going this route with their lens offerings.
I don't think I've ever seen a 26 millimeter lens. I don't recall at all ever seeing that focal length. And I like it because it's wider than 28. 28's never quite wide enough for me, and I love 24. This would probably be comfortable to me because it just gets a little bit past that 28 millimeter mark.
I like 28 personally, but maybe 26 would be the new 28. And then they also rounded out their rest of their series as far as their longer focal lengths for people who want to do sports and wildlife with some lenses that have teleconverters built into it, 400 and 600 to be precise.
Speaking of long lenses, one thing that I happened to notice when reading through the specs of the 600 millimeter is they have a warning for people who have a pacemaker or other medical device that the magnet or magnets in the product could cause medical devices to malfunction. That really caught my attention and something I've never heard of before. Are you guys familiar with that?
Newer focusing systems are electromagnetic, called the Silky Swift voice coil motor, SSVCM. With those magnets of that size to move that glass, it may cause issues, and I think you just want to be safe just before somebody maybe keels over. Hopefully it doesn't happen, just like, shooting something on the sideline of an NFL game, and it's like, what happened to this guy? His lens was too close to his chest. How's that happen? Silky Swift.
So that would only be the case when the lens is in operation, obviously.
Who knows? Magnets are magnets, but typically if it's electromagnetic, it has to have some electricity going through it.
Right.
Now, one comment I noticed here that somebody left on the reviews of the 400-2.8, usual complaint, no arc or Swiss foot, and Nikon has gone to a new mounting screw alignment, so existing really right stuff and other aftermarket replacement feet will not work. You need the dreaded 2-screw to arc or Swiss plate adapter. I've had that issue with other manufacturers and other things, and unfortunately, none of this is standardized. That's the good news and the bad news, but it really is kind of a nuisance when there is sort of a standard that a lot of people have adapted to, and Arca Swiss is a very, very common mount and a good mount. It's secure, but that's just something to keep in mind. You might have to do a little bit of improvising here if you are using Arca Swiss, seats on your tripod and things of that sort. You might have to do a little bit of playing around here.
Typically, those brands like Kirk, Arca, will really right stuff, will realize that and probably put the screws in the right spot, or a replacement foot. That typically happens, but it takes time to machine things, and those companies need to get the lens in their possession to do so. So that's why when new lenses come out, new cameras, it's always just like, why isn't there accessories for this on day one? Well, sometimes manufacturers are smaller and they're waiting for those new products just like the rest of us folk. Time is a big thing when it comes down to it.
Something I'm curious about is that a year ago, we would talk about new gear, and even less than a year ago, and we would just say, we're just talking about it, no one's seen it, and we're not sure when we're getting it. It was like a lot of announcements, but nobody was able to go buy anything because of all of the backups with the trade that was going on. It was kind of a mess. Things are getting better now, from what I understand. But with all of the releases that we are now talking about on this show, are most of them going to be readily available or available when they were reported to be ready and available? Or are we going to be sitting around dragging our feet for months waiting for stuff to come in drips and drabs?
It depends on the manufacturer. Some manufacturers do a good job of announcing something when they have enough built already. Some manufacturers, they announce something to basically say, look over here, we're releasing stuff, and then they release it maybe 3 or 2 months down the road because they don't want their customers to go somewhere else. So you have two different trains of thought there when it comes down to new releases.
Okay, we are at the midway point, so we're going to take a short break for traffic and weather, and we come back more with new lenses with Kevin Rickert. Stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website, and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
Okay, we are back with Kevin Rickert, and now we're going to talk about Olympus no longer exists. Now it's the it's it's a spiritual camera system, the OM system, formerly known as Olympus. And the OM system now has several new lenses, starting with a 90 millimeter macro that is kind of cool. You want to tell us about it?
Yes, it is one of those lenses you pick up and you're like, where's the lens? It's very light, which makes sense for a system that is meant to be compact and light. It is a 2x magnification macro lens, so you can get a lot of detail on whatever your subject is.
That's twice life size, right?
That is 2x life size, exactly.
Oh.
And it could take teleconverters, so if you put a 2x on there, you get 4x life size, but it's micro four thirds, which has a 2x crop factor, so therefore, getting a lot of magnification with this. So if you want to see carpet in its richer detail, by all means, you could use this lens to get the detail on whatever you want, good and bad. So it's a very fun lens for a lot of people who love macro.
I've shot on full frame with the 200, 180, and 200 millimeter macro lenses, and I find them to be really interesting to work with. You got to be steady. But what's nice is that you really get to isolate your subject, especially at wider apertures, and things like shadows are not an issue. And if you're photographing wildlife like certain insects, butterflies, things of that sort, you're not scaring because you're not on top. You're away from them, so you could get right on top of them visually without physically being on top of them. I just really happen to like the perspective of real close macro work, and this lens sounds like it would be an absolute giggle to work with. It sounds fascinating to me, and the system is a good system as well.
What is macro lens really? What are we talking about there? How is it differentiated from a telephoto lens? Okay,
there is actually a difference optically. Now, there are lenses that will do close focusing. They are not necessarily macro lenses. A regular lens, most of the lenses that we use, 98% of the lenses we use, have curved fields of focus. So if you were to be wide aperture and get close up to something, say a page of newsprint, and you focus on the newsprint, the center will be sharp and the edges will go a little bit soft because it's curved field of focus. It's not flat, it's curved. A macro lens has a flat plane of focus, like an enlarging lens, actually, which means that if you photographed at wide aperture and the camera was parallel to a document or a piece of artwork, at wide aperture, all the corners will be as sharp as the center, whereas if you had a conventional lens of the same focal length that was not a macro design, the edges might be soft, they're not going to be as well corrected, and you have to stop the lens down to get the corners sharp. So that is one of the big differences. And most macro lenses are designed to be at their highest resolving power at closer range and not as sharp at infinity. You may not notice it, but if you were to do actual technical measurements, they're sharper close up. They have a flat plane of focus. So that's really what the difference is. Macro also means it's possible to focus at life size. Now, what's interesting is that Nikon has always been calling their macro lenses micro Nikkors. And micro is actually incorrect because their lenses, for the longest time, only went down to half life size, not even life size. So micro wasn't a technically correct name, but macro means literally it'll do it life size. And in this case, it goes twice life size.
So Kevin, you were talking earlier about these OM system lenses, saying that one of the differentiating factors is their weather sealing. Can you give us more detail about that?
Yeah, so we all know that there's lenses out there that are listed as being moisture resistant or weather sealed. And OM System did re-release lenses, and people, what's the difference? Why is this a version 2? And what they did, they updated the weather sealing to be IP53. And the interesting part of that is that most manufacturers of lenses do not put a IP rating on there because that's actually an industry standard. They just say in vague terms, oh, this is weather resistant. Well, what type of weather are we talking about? A downpour or just a drizzle? Am I going to Seattle or a rainforest? It's like that idea of where are you going with this? So since OM came out with the OM1 and the OM5, which have some form of weather sealing on there that is IP53 rated, what they did was made sure the lenses match that quality as well. So they test them with dust and water, and it gets a rating, gets stamp of approval, letting you know that it could take it. I think more companies should be like, if it's weather sealed, give us an IP rating so someone knows what they're getting into before they get disappointed.
It's called accountability. I mean, again, you can go into all kinds of marketing nonsense, but when you put down something like IP53, you're giving an actual standard. You're giving real numbers and real figures that you could actually measure against. And that's important. I mean, hats off to them for doing that.
Yeah, really. So moving on from OM Systems, there were 8 lenses released by Sigma in 2022, 2023, and there's also a very recent development from Sigma as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, so Sigma has been trying to re-establish themselves with other mounts, because since they're part of the L-Mount Alliance, which is Sigma, Panasonic, and Leica, basically they'll make lenses for that system. So people who have a Panasonic Lumix S5 or a Leica SL2, they will have lenses for that system. So they're trying to flesh out their mirrorless lineup, and typically when they do that, they release for the L-Mount and then the E-mount for Sony users. So that's been good that they're redesigning the lenses for mirrorless users, but they also went and re-released some lenses for Fujifilm X mount, and just recently they announced some for the Z mount. So this is, in my knowledge, the first time a major third-party brand, Sigma, Tamron, has officially put out a lens for the Z mount or RF mount. But in this case, Sigma has released the 16 millimeter APS-C, 30 millimeter APS-C, and 56 millimeter APS-C, which existed on other mounts, for the Z mount now. And also they went back and released some lenses for the X mount, like I mentioned before. They've had a lot of lenses come out. Sigma's just been, feels like almost every month they come out with a new lens. And recently they came out with the 50 1.4 DG DN, which is just made for mirrorless, for L mount and E mount. I had a chance to play with that lens, and picking it up felt great. It's very sharp. It's very well priced because it's a Sigma. And I think we're at the point with third-party lens companies like Sigma, Tamron, Tokina to some degree, is that it's not a dirty word anymore. These companies make great lenses because they have done in the past, and now they're putting the money where their mouth is. So that 50 1.4, I played with it. I gave it to the store associates when it was released so they could actually understand what they're talking about when the customer comes in, and they were loving it too. Sigma has been very, very good.
I'm kind of taken where how a 50 millimeter 1.4 lens has suddenly become in vogue. It used to be that 50 1.4 was like the lens that, yeah, that's the normal lens you get, and then you go buy other lenses to take other pictures. And the 50 was kind of lost. I mean, I, for the longest time, never really related to a 50 millimeter lens. The past 2 years, I started to use them a lot after shooting nothing but wide angles for forever. And I just find it interesting that a lot of manufacturers are starting to put interest back into the normal lens and improving upon them and making them lenses that are actually just fun to use and technically amazing. So I kind of like that. I think it's kind of interesting that a 51.4, which used to be like the snooze lens, is now getting headlines.
Yeah, at a point you had I remember it always being like, oh, here's the 51.8. That's the basic one. That's your nifty 50. I remember Canon with the EF had a 1.4, which is a step up, but it wasn't the L. And then they had the 1.2, which was their show me piece. And I think why a lot of people will go with the 50 millimeter is simply because if they're on APS-C, it's approximately 85, so it's like 75 millimeter. And then they could keep that lens and they'll have a 50 millimeter once they go full frame. And it's just a perfect middle point. When it comes down to it, it's not 35, it's not 85, and typically the prices were affordable for people to just get started with a prime lens. So back in the day, that was my go-to lens when I worked for another retailer. I was like, you like that creamy background? You like that bokeh? Yeah, here's a 50 1.8, nifty 50, and it costs less than $300. And people loved it. Like, wow, these pictures pop now. This is amazing. I didn't know you could get something like this. That was like the gateway into DSLR cameras for a lot of people. And now a lot of manufacturers are spitting out 50 millimeter lenses, like Sony has too many. And maybe it's a good time to segue into the new Sony that was announced, which was the 50 1.4 GM. And you're like, another 50? Sony, don't you have a 1.2 GM? Yeah, they do. So I had time to play with this one, and I think why Sony came out with a 1.4 was simply because they wanted a more affordable version of the 1.2. So people were like, this is my lens. And I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous years, but Sony has been quietly replacing the Zeiss branded lenses that they had, like the 50 1.4, the 35 1.4. They're now putting those under the Sony GM line. So this is one of those lenses. I think it's downstairs still, maybe, but I gave it to the sales associates because I wanted them to see it the day it was announced. Picking it up, it is small. It is smaller than the Sigma. It's more expensive than the Sigma, but it looks exactly like the 35 millimeter 1.4 that was announced. It's smaller than the 1.2 because of the aperture size, but it's a very fast focusing lens. Earlier, when I gave it to the sales associates, they were like, this lens is very, very nice. It's quiet, speedy, sharp, and some early reviews on the interwebs are saying that it's basically optically perfect. Who knows when it gets to people's hands, because, people always will say bad things no matter what, but it is a very nice piece. I believe it's going to retail for $12.99, which is cheaper than a 1.2, but more than the Sigma. So people have options, and options are always good when it comes down to lenses. So I'm sure you could call up B&H, and we'll tell you, which one you should get, the Sigma or the new Sony GM. Or maybe we'll tell you to get the 51.2, depending on what you're doing. You can always call us up and we'll tell you where to go with that. But Sony has done a great job with their releases this year, and they've come up with some new ones besides this one.
How does that hypothetical conversation go? I want a 50, I have a Sony camera. How would you inquire as to what would be best for me?
Oh, that's a great question. So typically how I train the sales associates and the other trainers too instill this problem-solving aspect to things, basically asking questions. So it's asking questions like, what are you doing? And what camera are you putting it on? Where are you coming from? Because sometimes people may have shot with a different system and they want to know, what should I go to? But when it comes to these lenses, it's like, what are you doing? Do you need that 1.2? Do you know that there may not be a difference for what you're trying to shoot? That 1.2 is going to cost more money. All right, so you really need that 1.2? Okay, then I think you should go with it. If you want to save size, if you're doing video on a gimbal and you want something smaller, then you may go for the 1.4. And people are like, okay, that makes sense. And then when it comes down to other factors, if they don't want to go with the Sony, maybe for some cost consideration, maybe the Sigma, or maybe I love the 55 1.8 from Sony. It's a classic lens. It's one of those things you have to problem solve, qualify the customer, ask all the questions you possibly can to make sure they're making the right decision. This goes for everything. You don't want to just blindly throw a solution at a customer, but you don't know what they're doing. Find out. What's the use case for this? You want a smaller one? You're like Alan, you have weak hands? You maybe want the smaller lens, I think.
All comes down to purpose.
It does.
Hand strength.
There's a few other lenses from Sony. Quickly go through it. They re-released, and this is once again trying to sunset the Zeiss Alpha lenses, the ZA lenses that they had. They came out with a 16 to 35 f4 power zoom lens. Once again, that's your wide angle. For people who are doing like real estate, landscapes, I'm actually borrowing one to take on a trip because it's about that size. It is a smaller lens compared to the original 16-35 f4. It has that new Sony aesthetic, so it has a clickable aperture ring on there. And it is smaller, which is great. And they also came out with a 24-70 2.8 GM2. And that is I don't know what alchemy Sony did with this, but they made that lens smaller. And they claim it's the lightest and smallest 24-70 2.8 in that class. It is, I believe, 20% smaller than the predecessor, which I have. And I wish they started with this size, but I guess you have to figure it out that you can try to make lenses smaller and still be optically superior than the prior version. That's also a fun lens. Now we get into the weird focal length time of the day. So they also came out with a 20 to 70 millimeter f4 lens. It's not the GM badge, but it's a G lens, which is still great.
What's the difference between a G and a GM?
Basically, when it comes down to it, it's the coatings on there, the spherical elements. It's the ceiling on there. So GM, which is Goldmaster, is their top of the line, their L series, so to speak, or their gold ring series, as Nikon calls theirs. And then you have the G, which is their better but affordable.
Mid-level.
Exactly. So the 20 to 70 f4 is an interesting focal length because it's wider than 24. I think it's going to replace their 24 to 70 f4 lens that they had for a long period of time. This is a great lens for people who want a little bit of wide angle, but more versatility. So if someone doesn't want to carry a 16 to 35 and a 24 to 70 with them, or don't really care about 2.8 aperture, then this is a great travel lens to go and have a bit of a wide angle and a little bit of like medium telephoto.
I think it's important to note that anybody who's going to be buying a zoom lens, regardless of what brand you're dealing with, if you have an option between a 2.8 and an f4 version of the same focal range, I think it's a good idea to look into the f4 version because often it's about, on average, about a third lighter and about a third smaller than the 2.8 version. And if size and weight are an issue, this is a big consideration. Now, again, that one stop you might need if you're going to be working indoors a lot or under darker, less lit circumstances, you might want to go for the 2.8. But if you're going to be working under average circumstances and stuff like that, f4 is a very fine aperture. And again, it takes a lot of weight and size off of your system. And that could be a huge deal breaker for a lot of people.
It's true. I'm going to Mexico, and that's why I'm borrowing the 16 to 35 f4 for size. And typically I travel with my 35 to 150 Tamron lens, which is a big lens. This time I'm like, I'm going to go with my 24 to 105 f4 because it's about saving space, especially when you have to worry about checking carry-on fees and stuff like that. I don't want to pay more money for a trip that's costing me money.
Sure.
And that's a great segue to our next manufacturer, Tamron.
Oh, one of my favorite. They've been doing a great job in the past few years on releasing unique focal lengths and coming with a cohesive thought behind everything they come out with. We just mentioned a 20 to 70 lens, so they have a 20 to 40 lens, which predates the 20 to 70 from Sony, but it's a 2.8. It's small, perfect for someone who's on a gimbal. It's perfect for someone like me who wants to downsize their kit. So theoretically, it makes me think I should think long and hard about buying one of the two. But the thing is like it's a 2.8. I have a 42.5 lens that I use from Sony. That's my everyday lens. So theoretically, this can replace that. But do I really replace lenses or just buy more of them? That's the major question. I'm running out of space.
No, you just keep buying more. And that also, if you buy more lenses, that's a segue to buying another camera bag. So it's important to keep doing this. You have to keep the momentum going. You buy lenses, you need more bags. Okay, it's part of the cycles. You have to do that. All joking aside, though, I also was looking at this 20 to 40 2.8, and that is again for traveling and just walking around. That is a great size and weight and focal range. Another nice thing about this lens, it focuses down to a little bit under 7 inches. So you could use it for some interesting close-up, especially at wider angles. I mean, you can get some fun imagery with this lens.
I can't do the camera bag thing anymore because I'm kind of banned from buying camera bags now, so I have to stick with what I have.
You're not supposed to show the new bags to anybody in your family. Haven't you figured that out yet?
It's about space. I live in Brooklyn. Come on. It's
If you get a large enough bag, you just move into it.
Maybe. But I like my bags that I have now. They do the job. And I think it's just, at that point, with having so many options, I can pick and choose what I want to bring with me. But that 20 to 40 being so small, like you said, around 7 inches, it's nice. It's tiny. It is, 2.8 is a great aperture. And now that I'm thinking, I have a 35 to 150, 2 to 2.8 lens. And that replaced the need for 24 to 70 and 70 to 200. Now I can maybe move away from a 16 to 35 to do most of my, travel stuff. But the issue with that is like I have to look at, do I need anything less than 20 millimeters with the 16 to 35? Am I shooting at anything less than that? Because sometimes people just go to the lens and they don't look at the pictures that they take and say, you know what? I have a 70-200 lens, and I never shoot anything at 200. So do I really need that lens? Will I be able to get around with a 105 lens like I'm doing in the coming week or so? Will that work for me? So people should take a look and realize, am I using this focal length a lot? If I'm not, maybe you could go with something else, and maybe it'll make you a better photographer if you kind of limit yourself. That's why I used to tell people, travel with a prime lens. That's how our eyes work. It'll lock you in, and you can get better because you have to think of more compositions when you limit yourself, so to speak.
In 2 weeks, I'm heading out for a few days down to South Carolina, and I'm only taking one camera, one lens. I've already decided that. I'm taking a 15mm 1.2 on my, and that's it. That's going to be the lens I'm going to use for everything. And anything else you need, I got my phone. So, what brand camera are you shooting with?
I shoot Sony A7 IV.
Okay, now, have you ever used that clear view function?
Clear image zoom?
Yes.
Typically, no.
Because I have, and it's a remarkable feature. It's in most every Sony camera right now. Now, you can't use it in RAW, but if you're shooting JPEGs, when you flip into this mode, you can double the focal length of your lens without light loss. So in other words, if you have a 100mm f2 lens, it now becomes a 200mm f2 lens with the same minimum focus and zero optical loss. You might want to check that out. Like you said, how often do you use 200? You may not need to have that 200 with you. A 100 might be more than enough. Take a look at it.
I will, but I really like RAW.
So do I. That's why I don't bother. But I've used both, and it does work. And that's a great feature to have that you could revert to whenever you need to.
Another thing you could do, you could get a Tamron 50-400mm lens if you're not afraid of heavy lifting.
Which brings us to the next lens, a Tamron 50-400mm. It's a 4.5 to 6.3 Di3 VXD. And that was released in August. But also it gives you one hell of a range of focal lengths to play around with, an 8x zoom.
It's a space saver lens when it comes down to it. Plus you get a benefit of 50 extra millimeters because typically the focal length is 100 to 400. Now getting just a little bit more. It's for those people who know they're going to be in that focal range and not need anything wide. It's a good piece to the arsenal, so to speak, when it comes down to figuring out when they're going on a trip and be like, I think I want to take pictures of a compressed landscape or on a safari. They're making focal lengths that we never have thought of. 50 to 400 is a good range for some people.
Yeah, and it's also, it's just over 7 inches long, this lens, which also it's a great travel lens. It'll travel with you very well.
Well, speaking of travel, we're at the end of the lenses. So tell us about your upcoming trip, Kevin. Where are you going in Mexico?
I'm going to Puerto Vallarta and then flying across to Mexico City, which I'm really excited about. I'm looking forward to one of the biggest cities in North America, which people forget.
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to have a great time. It's been terrific speaking with you again and having you back on the show. It's always an informative session that we have with you. Good luck on your trip. Hope it's a good vacation and anything else that's coming up on your horizon. Kevin, thank you for joining us. And again, thank you for your efforts that you go through in your job for B&H. If you've ever been to our store and if you've ever called B&H and dealt with any of our sales associates, you know that these people know what they're talking about. They'll steer you in the best way for your needs. And I think that's one of the biggest selling points for B&H, and it's something that we're all kind of proud of. And Kevin, you're greatly responsible for that. So thank you very, very much for the job you do on behalf of all of our customers.
Thank you.
Now, if you are a fan of the show, but you ain't yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast and click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog where we post photos from our guests along with the show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group where you can share your favorite photos and comment about the show. I'm your host, Alan Weitz. Jill Waterman is our senior creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. Our executive producer is Jeremy Weiss, and our editorial director is Sean Steiner. On behalf of all of us, thank you oh so much for tuning in today.